Hello and welcome to Future Back Drinking, a new podcast series from PepsiCo and Time. I'm your host, Dr. Athena Kanioura, and as PepsiCo's Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer, I believe it's incredibly important to speak with today's industry leaders and explore the emerging innovations and ideas that are certain to impact all of us. Listen along as top-tier visionaries reveal the challenges, opportunities, and wow moments they've encountered in transforming today's fast-paced world. Future Back Drinking is more than just a podcast. It's a journey through the now into the next, served with a twist. And in these episodes, I sat down for a cup of coffee with Cassie Kozyrkov. Cassie Kozyrkov is the former chief decision scientist at Google, where she trained over 20,000 Googlers about data-driven decision-making and AI. Now, she runs her own consulting agency to help leaders optimize their biggest decisions. Decision science is real and arguably needed now more than ever in a world where the AI mandate in business feels so pressing. Here is our conversation. Hi, Cassie. Thank you again for making the time. It's so wonderful to see you again.
Here's to a great conversation.
And oh my God, you have had such an amazing kind of run, both in Google and even now, of course, in your new adventure and your new journey, which I'm sure you can tell us more details. But in the simplest possible sense, what does decision intelligence mean?
Yeah, decision intelligence is the discipline of turning information into, hopefully, better actions at any scale, in any setting. In other words, it is taking a decision-first approach to technology based on information or to behaviors that are to be driven by information. And as you start there with the decision itself, you may find that you have turned that into an enormous enterprise-scale AI project, but you are always starting your framework from what is the decision, what are the options, what are the priorities, and how might I actually like to decide?
So you look at areas like artificial intelligence and you say, okay, I want to apply artificial intelligence for workforce optimization or creative content. And we do know that still the biggest problem is, bias and what comes with that. And with decision intelligence, do you foresee that this is kind of going to be the same issue? Do you foresee that this is actually helping mitigate that bias because it relies a bit more on the logical thinking and the process? So help us understand a bit the difference on how it solves practical problems.
Sure, absolutely. So as you start to think about that stuff, you start to realize that there are a few very, very important decisions, all of which are subjective, that will fold into the creation of an AI system. And by the time that you're downstream and you're just doing the engineering work, someone else has already come up with answers to those questions. But those questions are hard to answer in the first place. And those are the ones where leaders need to step up and see that their role in an AI project is a little trickier than it sounds on the surface. And that there is a lot to learn here. There is a lot to do, and it's possible to do it well, and it's possible to do it poorly. So what about the bias bit? Bias is the equivalent of getting a human student, and you give them some textbook, and you don't even open the textbook, you never check the textbook, you never think about what textbook you're teaching your human student from. Well, that would be a very bad way to go at teaching. So you, as the teacher, need to have some sense of where you want the student to go, why this textbook, what would be appropriate, what would be inappropriate, and how would we know? And so the bias bit comes in when you have equivalent of teachers not checking the textbook. So what does it mean for a piece of learning material to be appropriate? Well, that's not for the engineer downstream to figure out. That is for somebody in a role of leadership responsibility to figure out. So is it helpful to approach a project from a decision intelligence standpoint? Absolutely. Will it help with bias if you do it right? Absolutely. Is it some kind of silver bullet? It isn't. What it is recognizing that when we don't put the effort in, that's when things go wrong.
That's wonderful. You touched on the role of the leader several times. You talked about downstream the engineering, but then you talked about the leader and the role of the leader. So How do you see the leaders of the future with the evolution of decision intelligence? What traits or what attributes do they need to have to take advantage of this intelligence across the board?
Yeah, I love this question. So there are some decision principles which, if you haven't grasped them, you will unknowingly be a hazard in a leadership role involving complex technology. And I love, Athena, how you brought this back to complex technology, that the general form it's not AI or Gen AI or even AGI, artificial general intelligence. The general form is complex technology. And what we know is that technology is getting more and more complex every day. And that growth in complexity, that's going to be exponential if it isn't already. And here I like to bring a genie versus wisher analogy, right? So if you think about complex technology or AI as the proliferation of magic lamps with very powerful genies in them, and the genies are becoming more and more and more powerful. What's not becoming more powerful fast enough, definitely not at the same pace, is the wisher. And we know from all those stories, those bedtime stories that humanity has been telling itself for centuries, for millennia, that it's not the genie that's dangerous. It is the unskilled wisher. It might be very easy to make a request to your AI team as a leader, and then your AI team goes and executes on it. And that request might have been poorly thought through. It might have been too ambiguous, and then we find that the genie finds some perverse way to meet the request exactly, and the world is worse, and the wisher is worse off, and oh, oops, is the feeling. Oh, oops, I should have thought more carefully about what I was asking for. I should have understood the consequences of my actions, of my request. And that ability to express with precision, to control what the genie is going to do, that is one of those core skills that you would want in anybody at the center of a project like this.
In the context of you being one of the pioneers of establishing this technology, what is your point of view? Are we as a society and, obviously as companies, jumping too quick into the gun of AI?
What's going on is that a lot of enterprises, a lot of leaders are getting mandates to have AI strategies, to implement AI, to implement Gen AI. One of these ways is give every worker in your team access to a generative AI tool built or made by somebody else, or even made by you maybe. And then ask them to use their personal judgment on how to make themselves more productive. So you are putting responsibility for the output directly in the hands of your individuals. That is a very safe way to go about things. If you don't like what happens, you have immediately got a person that you can say was using a tool poorly, and you might want to recommend that person no longer to be on that team. It's a very, very different game from taking the output out of the hands of individuals and saying, we as an organization are going to take the human out of the loop entirely and at scale use generative AI. But that's also the hardest thing to do, because now you don't have that layer of humans in the loop. And so understanding this not from the perspective of who's got the best algorithm for turning data into patterns, into code, but rather who has the best way to apply a system safely and effectively that is either at enterprise scale or at individual scale, and that is the decision intelligence piece. In order to safely and effectively automate at enterprise scale, you need to be able to say what it means for your system to work. And that is very hard with a chatbot. If you're going to take all the humans out of the loop, what does it mean?
So, Cassie, you brought a very interesting point, and which is, the current debate, both in the tech industry, but also reflecting a bit with my peers in the corporate world, human in the loop or human out of the loop, right? And where actually do we allow, under which circumstances, the human to be out of the loop, right? So, do you have any practical examples where you say there, we absolutely need to have the human in the loop? There, the way we see it based on kind of past and current experience, it's actually proven better that we need to have more the human out of the loop. Any thoughts?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the same thinking at its core as you would have about traditional software systems. Again, any complex technology, this is not AI specific. If you were going to program some kind of automations the traditional way, but there were a whole lot of potentially unexpected consequences of what you're doing for a potentially very mission-critical application, you would be nervous to take humans out of the loop. Because by putting a human in the loop, you're putting a sort of decision maker of last resort between the system and whatever impact it's going to have on the universe. When we AI wash systems that are potentially not that performant, we are appealing to a kind of marketing that has anthropomorphization at its core. In other words, we are using words like mathematics, intelligent, human-like, all sorts of science fiction-y words to suggest that we have built a system that is smart, whatever smart means. And when we do that, we hit something that I like to call the AI reliability paradox. So here's how to think about this. Let's imagine you're hiring 2 workers. Throw some names out. I mean, what can we call these workers? 2 names.
George and Mark.
George and Mark. And who is the smarter, better worker?
Let's choose Mark.
Let's choose Mark. So Mark, let's say George, he's hopeless. Poor George. George, his performance effectiveness is like 70%. It hurts to watch him do his job. Now, as a result of this, we know George is a known quantity. We're probably not going to send him out to do a whole lot of mission-critical stuff at scale unsupervised. Whereas Mark, no one has ever seen Mark make a mistake. This might be because Mark is new on the job. This might be because Mark is pretty performant. But regardless, we've got no evidence of failure with Mark yet. Question is, which of these is more dangerous to your organization? I would argue that it might be Mark. Because with George, you don't let George out of the door without a safety net. Right? Everyone's always watching. Poor George is going to mess up at any moment. And we know what George is. But we don't know what Mark is. And if we treat Mark as infallible, as intelligent, as a genius, just let him go do whatever he's doing, we set ourselves up for danger. And this is the AI reliability paradox, because AI is treated by many of your human workers as Mark. They assume that what comes out of an AI system is smart, that it probably knows better than they do. And what needs to happen is that we need to have a conversation with all the human workers and explain to them that AI should be treated like George, not Mark. AI needs safety nets. The human in the loop is the safety net, right? We're just destroying the human in the loop system by telling all the humans in the loop to trust the AI. And we have to be telling them the opposite. Don't trust AI. That's the reason you're in the loop. Use the system to make yourself better at your job, but don't trust it and don't punt responsibility to the AI system. You, the human, is still responsible. If you don't feel responsible, you're not in the loop anymore. So that's a really tricky thing to watch out for.
And that makes a lot of sense. That's why the importance of upskilling and reskilling the employees and making them understand that if used the right way, it will benefit tremendously their career and, of course, their productivity, and the productivity of the company is so critical for everyone. How is the corporate world embracing all the next technologies, not just AI, all the next technologies? What does it mean for us? And should we actually push back? I mean, I'm actually very hesitant to say, they've cracked the code. I can actually use Gen AI across everything that we do in a very reliable way, in a very cost-efficient way, right? I don't feel this way, yet. Do you believe we will reach this inflection point where the level of confidence for the enterprises will be there to go to enterprise-wide applications?
Yeah, happy to jump into that. So first, it's a question really of consequence and responsibility. If there were AI companies that were willing to underwrite all consequences that would happen from enterprise-scale use of their technology, what would be the barrier to adoption, right? All consequences fully underwritten. Now we realize, they're not actually going to give you that contract. They are not going to take full responsibility for any use of their technology. Then what do we need in order for the technology to be adopted by enterprise? As you said, some mechanism of getting confidence in how well the tool does what it is supposed to do. And because what it is supposed to do is whatever you need it to, right? That's on you. You as the leader have to come up with those statements. You as the leader have to say, here's what we want done. Here's what it means for it to work. Here's how we're going to check that it works. Here are the inputs that we're going to put into the system. Because all of that has to be owned by the enterprise leader, and all those things are decision intelligence questions, in order to trust the system, you need to have good mechanisms in place for being able to articulate what you need and then check that it has been delivered. Now, I see that as an enormous gap. Those mechanisms and tools that are not part of the product, they are something that the enterprise team would use. Those tools don't exist today. Because they don't exist, it is very difficult to trust this kind of thing. Right? No one's going to underwrite it for you, and you don't have the tools to check it yourself. It's very, very hard. So do I see this as a huge gap? Absolutely. Am I working to fix it? Absolutely. Do I think that it will be fixed? I very much believe in that.
Oh, awesome. Again, this feeling that, if you're a small company, if you're a medium-sized company, that you don't have the big investments, or you don't have the resources or the connections, you will be left behind, and you will have financial implications. Because reality, the promise of, especially AI has been democratization, right? That it gives opportunity for everyone to leverage those type of technologies. And we seem to be going actually the opposite way, that, you can afford, you can buy, and therefore you can grow. You are small, you cannot afford, and therefore you are left behind. So how do you see the future evolving?
I mean, if we think about how the economics are working today, they're not working that well for the providers of foundation models. And most of the consumption is consumers who aren't paying very much for access to that technology at all. So in some sense, the economic winners right now are on the smaller side. How this will play out going into the future, I think that it will be very similar to how we think about the internet or access to cloud computing resources or access to data centers, right? Very few small companies are expecting that they are going to go and build their own data center in month one. You're not going to do all of that from scratch as an e-commerce startup. You will instead go and partner with vendors. And the vendor ecosystem, I would say, is actually sharding a whole lot now. This is very tricky to keep up with. Because what we're doing as a species is we're making it easier and easier to create more technology, to build on top of tools that others have made. Is there a bit of a shaky foundation? Maybe, if we don't fully understand the tool that we've built on top of, and then we build on top of that, and then we build on top of that, there's some shakiness, sure. But are we allowing ourselves to keep growing more and more niche software products on top of existing platforms? Absolutely. And so there I almost see a blossoming in smaller players taking advantage of the opportunities available to them. So there is some democratization, but of course there are also economies of scale at the foundation level, as there have been in other industries, and this has not meant that people have been locked out of technology, just has meant that you end up with a market where you have 2, 3, 4, 5 dominant players.
Wonderful. Okay, now we are going to our lightning round questions. Cassie, are you ready?
Okay, yeah, sure.
What decision are you most proud of?
I would say in terms of any professional decisions that I'm proud of, they all come to either thank you, Cassie, for having done your homework properly before jumping into a thing. Or they're of the thank goodness I had the courage to try it form. So that's how things would break down in my
powerful.
Yeah.
That's very powerful. Okay, biggest technology myth our listeners should be aware of.
That anything that calls itself AI has as big of an AI component as something else that calls itself AI. Like, you really don't know. It's like you have 2 glasses of water And one of them is brown and calls itself Pepsi, and the other one is very, very light and calls itself Pepsi, and there's only one drop of Pepsi in the second one. They're not both Pepsi. But they both call themselves that. That is how the AI industry, how this whole industry is these days. Even one drop, and they're claiming it. And this makes it very, very difficult to talk about who's selling what and who's doing what. So the myth that when it says AI, it's the same as something else that calls itself AI, is a huge myth.
Oh my God, I love this example. I need to use it in our company.
Go ahead.
We have our executive committee next week. I should be definitely using that.
Feel free.
I will, Cassie, now that you gave me the permission to use it. Okay, last question. Obviously, the theme of our session is future back drinking. So, alcoholic or non-alcoholic drinks, doesn't matter, a drink. So, on that light, if you were to have a drink with someone, who that would be and why?
Do they have to be living?
No, they don't.
Absolutely Nelson Mandela. As a proud South African, he's a hero that the world is very lucky to have had.
With that, oh my God, time has passed so quickly. Great ending. Thank you so much for joining me. That was an excellent discussion. I hope to see you soon, kind of face to face.
Thank you so much for having me, Athena. Yeah, this was so much fun, and I'm looking forward to many more of these.
Thank you for joining us on Future Back Drinking. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and stay connected with us on all your favorite podcast platforms.